provide their brief profile. Dr. Ajit Mohanty was an ICSR National Fellow. After his retirement in 2011 as Professor of Psychology in Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies, JNU. He taught in different universities for 42 years, including 28 years as a professor. He became a professor in Utkal University in the year 1983, where he was 37, the youngest professor in the country. He has over 180 publications in different national and international journals and has book chapters in 8 books in the area of psychology and language studies. His latest book is The Multilingual Reality, Reading with Languages. He was a professor and chairperson at the Center of Advanced Study in Psychology, Utkal University, and president of the National Academy of Psychology, India. Our next panelist, Dr. Jitendra Jagpal, who is not here right now, is a psychiatrist who treats issues related to mental health and its various dimensions. Driven by his mission of unlocking the secrets of mind transformation and demystifying everyday success paths for common people, he has been associated with some of the leading psychiatry hospitals in India for 20 plus years. He conducts stress management sessions for various MNCs and corporate companies. He is a regular columnist and consultant on leading national media, both print and electronic, including Doordarshan, CNN, and India Today. Our moderator, Ms. Naina Raj, is pursuing PhD at the Psycholinguistics Lab, housed in the Linguistics Unit at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Delhi. Her broad interests lie in the area of central processing in South Asian languages, where she studies how speakers of a language comprehend and produce sentences in that language. She is currently working on exploring the interaction of predictive processing and morphological complexity in languages such as Malayalam and Mandari using experimental methods. Before I start the session, I request our senior editor, National Book Trust India, Shri Kumar Vikram, to kindly felicitate the guests. Let's give a round of applause to our guests. Thank you, sir. Now I request Ms. Naina Raj to kindly start the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this panel discussion where we're going to be exploring the question of what cognitive benefits there are of learning multiple languages, specifically in the case of children and young adults. So we'll start the discussion there and then maybe try and situate this question of multilingualism within the Indian context, which you may know already, we boast of quite a rich linguistic plurality. And then maybe extend that question to try and see what being a multilingual speaker actually means within this context. I'd also, as soon as we're joined by our second speaker, maybe talk a little bit about the clinical aspect of this question, the role of multilingualism in a sort of in like understanding what it does for mental well-being and any implications it may have for non-neurotypical populations, especially individuals with language and reading disorders. I also want to very briefly touch upon the multilingual acquisition and language development angle of this and see how that can then inform pedagogy and policy making. So that's a lot that we have to cover in the session, so I'll just jump straight into it. I think we'll have a Q&A session towards the end. We'll take a couple of questions maybe towards the last 10 minutes of the session. So with that said, I think a good place to start is to attempt to clarify what we mean when we say being multilingual confers certain cognitive advantages. From a very general and mainstream kind of point of view, we know that being multilingual somehow enhances cognitive flexibility, although we're not sure what exactly this entails. There's talk about how it can improve problem solving and even delay cognitive decline. So, Professor Mohanty, I want to begin by asking you, in your decades of studying this multilingualism question, both from the psycholinguistic side and also the more sociological like perspective, what exactly are these benefits that we're referring to? Do we have conclusive proof that such advantages exist from being multilingual?
Okay, I think thank you for beginning and for inviting me here. Um, See, the world is becoming increasingly multilingual. We all know that, you know, with the new economic system and large scale migration from certain parts of the world to the western part and all that, we are becoming increasingly multilingual. But one has to understand that the kind of multilingual scenario that we are talking about in our own country or in most part of the so-called developing world or the southern part of the hemisphere is very different from multiple language scenario in other countries. In USA, for example, which is linguistically quite diverse, you have 350 languages at least brought to the USA by immigrants from all over the world. But if you have been in US, you would notice that language uses are parallel in nature. So if some immigrants are together, they would be talking in Hindi or in Gujarati or in Urdu. But you go to the marketplace, you go to the social sphere, it's only English. So English is used in most domains of the social interaction in USA, whereas other languages are reserved for very in-group communication domains. Contrasted with that, you have the Indian scenario where languages come together. They fuse into each other. Uh, you do not know where does one language end and the other language begin. Where, for example, Bhojpuri ends and Hindi begin, or where does Maithili end and Hindi begin, or Hindi end and Rajasthani begin. So you do not know. Now, in that kind of situation, the large scale societal multilingualism, where every child grows up in a environment which is anything but monolingual, the question is what does it do to the mind of a child? Now, this debate as to whether bilinguals or multilingual individuals are cognitively different and cognitively better off compared to the monolingual children has been going on for quite some time. Since the 1930s, the debate has been going on. Around 1980, early 1980, some of our work with tribal children in India, in Orissa in particular, the Kond tribes, we decisively showed that children who grow up as multilingual are cognitively much better, they are more intelligent, they are more creative, and what is most important is they have a greater, per, better perception of language or languages in that sense. You know, when a child is using one particular language, conversing with somebody else who is using a different kind of language, or when the child is mixing languages in her own communication, child's understanding of the nature of languages becomes much more complicated, much more complex, and that is what enhances the cognitive ability of a child. Therefore, there is no doubt, you know, right now after our 1980 work, there have been a lot of other work, both neurolinguistic and psycholinguistic work, which decisively shows that multilingual children are more creative, they are more intelligent, they have what is called the better executive function. They can go from one kind of situation to the other, inhibit responses which are not required, and elicit responses which are important. So there are several domains of cognitive abilities in which the multilingual persons, individuals, are much better compared to the monolingual individual. We'll come to the dynamics of it much later. Yeah.
So I want to come back to your work with the Cone community a bit later. But what I want to talk about is this interesting thing that you're saying about, the perceived boundaries. Where does one language end? And I want to talk about this interesting thing that you mentioned about, we're not sure where one language ends and where one begins, these perceived boundaries. And that's how I want to bring it to this like Indian context. We're such a linguistically diverse area. It is very often the norm more than the exception that someone you encounter is bilingual, if not trilingual. Um, and so, something that you mention in your work is how learning and knowing multiple languages is essentially a network or a totality of communicative acts to meet daily life communicative needs, obviously, but it's also a big factor in shaping identities and identity formation. So, in talking about living in a multilingual environment, you talk about this very interesting correspondence between knowing multiple languages and having multiple language identities. Could you maybe elaborate on this relationship a bit more in terms of these perceived boundaries of a language?
Okay, what happens when you grow up in an environment which is multilingual, we switch between languages, between contexts in which languages are used, and a child early in her development learns to live with multiple languages. How does he do it? How is it that a child watching a television program switches from Hindi Sri Krishna to the cartoon program which is in English, or which may be in another language, or her own native language or provincial dominant language. Now the children switching between these languages quickly learn to differ. First thing they do is differentiate the languages. They have to. They have to differentiate the language because languages occur in the same context most often. Whereas in the United States kind of situation, or most part of the Western world, languages are already parallel in their use. There are certain people who use certain languages, but they do not mix the languages in the same similar social context. The social contexts are quite different when different languages are used in Western context. Whereas in our context, in the same situation, you may have multiple languages occurring together. Therefore, children would need to develop that skill of differentiating different languages. That is the beginning of what I have called multilingual socialization. A child being socialized in order to live with languages in the context, in her own context. And then children learn to communicate in multiple languages. That is not necessary. I am not saying that every child would develop what we call native like competence in each language. No, they don't have to develop full competence in each of the languages. When I use, for example, when I come to Delhi, I use little bit of Hindi. I am not a native speaker of Hindi, but I learn to be able to combine my knowledge of Odia, my knowledge of Hindi, my knowledge of Bengali, my knowledge of English or other languages in order to be able to manage a communication in multiple languages. So children very early in their lives do develop that. Our studies show that by the time a child is about 9 years of age, all children in Indian multilingual context learn to live with different languages. They learn to know, for example, whether wherein they would change from one language to the other. For example, if we are talking in one language and somebody else comes in, he or she doesn't understand the language of communication, then we need to change. So children very early in their development realize that there are implicit social norms or social rules as to when you change from language X to language Y. So it is this kind of a situation, the early awareness of multiple languages, which enhances the cognitive skill of children, because they need to differentiate languages, they need to mix languages or code mix languages in different contexts, they need to switch from language X to language Y and back to language X and so on. So in order to know how to do it appropriately, socially appropriately, they definitely develop more greater perception of languages, which in turn enhances their cognitive skills.
Right. And I actually want to get into this a little bit more. I feel like when we're talking very casually about a child that knows 2 or 3 languages, we're severely underplaying the skill and cognitive capacity that takes. Not only is this child aware of, the words or vocabulary in both these languages or the grammatical rules and syntax of both these languages, we must also appreciate that when this child is switching between these 2 languages, they are also aware of the context in which each language is appropriate, like you said, and the kind of social norms, when must we switch, when there's another interlocutor coming into the conversation, and so on. So there are all these discourse and like pragmatic factors at play as well. So yeah, maybe in this respect, you already kind of touched on it, sir. But could you tell us a little bit more about these periods of development for a child growing up in a multilingual environment, and what this kind of social awareness of these different languages look like?
Yeah, well, this is not the forum where I would talk about the stages of development of multilingual socialization which we have worked on. I don't think we are into that right now. What I would like to say that children uh, quite early in their development, even the rural children, the tribal area children that I have studied most, they do develop a facility of living with multiple. They may or may not use all the languages, but they are quite comfortable in situations or in contexts where multiple languages are used. And therefore, they move. For example, the child is using one language in the home situation, and the moment she goes out into the village, plays with other children, and interacts with other adults, there may be a slightly different variation of the language. They go into the marketplace, weekly markets in the rural areas. They learn to use different languages. They go to the post office or to the bus stop. They learn different languages. So what I have developed a notion without going into the details of the multilingual socialization. I've developed a notion that it is as if a child is developing multilingualism as the first language. We often ask, what is your first language? Yes, my first language is Odia. That's the language I learned first. That's a different idea altogether. But what is it that the children growing up in multilingual situation, what are they learning? They are learning, yes, they have a mother tongue, they have a language with which their community identifies, and therefore they have some kind of home language or mother tongue. But at the same time, considering the overall skill that the child is developing, by the time they are about 9 to 10 years of age, children are developing the how to use multilingualism as a form of communication. It's not multiple languages I'm talking about. It's developing the idea of multilingualism, that the societal contexts are varied in terms of the language used, and learning to live comfortably with that. There are norms, implicit norms in each society as to when language X will be used or when language Y will be used. There are norms of prestige differences associated with the languages. Very often in our social context, English is considered a more prestigious language, and other languages are perhaps, which is unfortunate. I have written against it, but that's a different thing. So a child knows that when you go to the post office or will go to the bus stop or railway station, you may get greater compliance by speaking in English or maybe Hindi or a language which has a higher status. So that status kind of hierarchy is something that the child already knows. And this is what I'm talking about multilingualism as a first language. child knows the total language environment. The child may not be proficient in each of these languages, but child knows how to deal with a complex linguistic environment.
Right. I want to highlight again this thing that you said about multilingualism as a first language. I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. So you've talked a little bit about the cognitive benefits of learning multiple languages and being in a multilingual environment. I also wanted to address the potential disadvantages that you've seen in your work with students who are in a predominantly monolingual environment or classroom in a academic setting. So there's work that you've done with multiple language communities in Andhra Pradesh and Kui language speakers in Odisha, where the medium of instruction is in a language that's different from their first language, in a state dominant language. You say in one of your works that a non-dominant medium of instruction has a subtractive effect on their competence, in fact, in the mother tongue, with the result that students in these communities end up neither learning their first language proficiently nor this medium of the language that's their medium of instruction. So we've been framing all this while this multilingual learning as an added advantage, but in fact it can actually be detrimental to not have a curriculum based on multilingual learning. What are your thoughts about that line?
Well, our studies quite early had shown that even if the environment is multilingual, the child is growing with multilingual skills. But two things are important for a child go into a classroom and make educational use of language. One is child's competence, level of competence in each of these languages, and second is child's identity. So when a child goes to a classroom, usually she identifies with her mother tongue, which is her family language or home language, or I have defined mother tongue as a language of community ascription. Linguists very often differ as to what is a mother tongue and all that. I don't want to get into that. For me, that a child or her community identifies with a particular language as their mother tongue is enough. So that is it is necessary to reinforce that identity of a child. And second, we all know that when a child comes with a higher proficiency.
अनिरुद्ध 4 वर्षीय एक बच्चा जो अपने पिता अभिनव जी से बिछड़ गया है, इसने ब्लू टी शर्ट पहना है, ग्रे कलर का पैंट है। जिस किसी व्यक्ति को इसको यह बच्चा दिखता है, द हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन काउंटर तक उसे छोड़ने में अनिरुद्ध 4 वर्षीय ब्लू टी शर्ट ग्रे पैंट वॉलंटियर्स प्लीज इसको थोड़ा ध्यान रखें। ब्लू टी शर्ट एंड ग्रे पैंट में यदि कोई 4 साल का बच्चा दिखता है, उसे हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन काउंटर तक छोड़ने की मदद करें।
Okay, you can see multilingualism at work. So what is happening? Actually, when a child goes to a classroom, her strength is in her mother tongue. We talk about education as a process of human resource development. Linguists and social scientists agree that child's most well-developed resource is her mother tongue. That's the language in which the child has already acquired what linguists will say as native-like competence by her 5th birthday. Therefore, when a child goes to the classroom or joins school, compared to all her resources, such for physical skills, social skills, other cognitive skills, language skills are the most developed. Therefore, you cannot call education a process of human resource development if you ignore the very competent resource with which a child comes to school. So it's imperative that you use child's mother tongue as the medium of instruction, as you say. I do not really consider medium of instruction as important as medium of child's thinking. When you are asking what should be a medium of instruction, that is irrelevant. What is the language in which the child thinks? So if child's medium of thinking is her mother tongue, I as a teacher have an option not to use mother tongue? This question of mother tongue has been uh, discussed and recommended in all our national educational framework. It's only recently that not only mother tongue but the multilingualism and mother tongue are being emphasized in NEP 2020. We have another session coming up on NEP 2020, so I don't want to preempt the discussion here. But that is what it is, that we need to bring the child from the mother tongue to multilingualism, because multilingualism, as I said, comes so naturally to a child. So what we have done, our studies have shown, and now actually this is more formally being used in many parts of the world as well as parts of India, where you begin a child's education in mother tongue, allow the mother tongue competence to grow to a higher level so that the child can competently use language for thinking, for cognitive activities, for classroom learning. Once that happens, then bring in language 2, language 3. We know that multiple languages are necessary. We know that a child must learn her mother tongue, child must also learn Hindi, child must also learn Sanskrit or English or other languages. Therefore, given that we are living in a world where which is multilingual and that our children need to develop multilingual skill, the royal road to multilingualism is the mother tongue. Promote child's mother tongue, build a strength in child's mother tongue, and on the basis of that foundation, strong linguistic cognitive foundation in the mother tongue, develop other language skills.
Okay, so we know for a fact that competence in your first language does influence or even determine your proficiency in the second language. And with that, I want to segue into this notion of mother tongue based multilingual education. You've pushed very strongly for it as the head of chairing multiple governmental committees and drafting multiple policies. This is something that you've advocated for quite a long time. And we do have a separate panel on this, but maybe could you please share with us what you found in some of the pilot programs that were implemented based on this mother tongue based multilingual
Well,
education?
we implemented for 6 years a program called MLE Plus, Multilingual Education Plus, which ran along with the government of Odisha's uh, plan of mother tongue based multilingual education. Now, what we have found very conclusively that when you strengthen a child's mother tongue skill, child also develops better scholastic achievement, and what is more important, child learns other languages much better. For example, if English, which has been one of the major concerns and preoccupations of parents in this country in choosing for the medium of instruction, if you really want to develop English in a child, more competent English in a child, allow for the mother tongue to develop much better, and then bring in English. English development is much better. That is what we have shown in our studies. That children whose mother tongue scores are much higher also score higher in English when they are taught in our project. They are taught in English as a third language, not even second language. Second language is Odia, and third language was Hindi, English. And if you test them at the level of grade 4 or 5, children's English score is much higher compared to children who have not been taught in their mother tongue. And what is more important, there is a clear correlation between child's mother tongue score and English score. In other words, the more competent a child is in mother tongue, the it is more likely that she would be also equally competent in English or other languages. So that is very clear that you need to promote child's mother tongue in order to develop multilingualism and English language competence or other language competence in a child. And this is worldwide data now. It's not just Indian research that I'm talking about, but worldwide this is something which has been shown quite conclusively.
Okay, so I think you've laid out a very effective roadmap for how to proceed, in the light of the fact that there is like this perceived hierarchy of languages, with English obviously taking this privileged position. Sorry. Dr. Nakwal will be joining us in a bit. In the meanwhile, I wanted to ask the audience if there were any questions for Professor Mohanty. We can answer one or two, and then maybe Professor Nagpal will join us. Just please raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead. 1 second.
Sir, you said that learning different languages can be like a holistic part of a child's development. But in your experience, is there any like limit to learning languages? Because I come from Himachal, so I know a little bit of Pahadi, and then Punjabi I know a little bit, and then Hindi and English, of course. But I've seen like learning these languages can play a role in like socializing, of course. But in your experience, have you seen like what is the maximum number of languages one can like learn?
Yeah. Well, there is no limit to the capacity of human capacity to learn languages. First thing. Therefore, what is the maximum number of languages a person can reasonably learn? I think there is no limit. Depends on how much time and effort you are willing to put in. The other question is there a age limit beyond which you cannot acquire multiple languages? There is no such age limit. Earlier, it was said that for first language acquisition, there is something called a critical period. That usually the early years are much more critical in order to learn a language, any language. But in terms of developing multilingual skills, there is absolutely no limit. We as human beings have unlimited capacity to acquire languages, and therefore there is no limit. And
Age is
other
also
thing
not a barrier.
before you go on, other thing I should emphasize is that already if you know multiple languages, your proficiency in learning an additional language is much better. In other words, if I move from one language to being a bilingual, it will require some effort. But then if from a bilingual, if I want to be a trilingual, the effort is much less. So the more the number of languages you acquire, the easier it is for acquiring other languages. It has been again a lot of research on that, and it is very conclusive that multilinguals are much more proficient in acquiring additional languages.
So can I just make one comment before? So that's quite interesting. I feel like a lot of the work that we're exposed to talks about this critical period, obviously, that if you don't learn a set of languages by the age of 8 or 9, then it's going to be obviously harder. But is there, like he said, is it not a function of age at all? Because if I am to acquire, say, Spanish now, compared to learning Spanish at the age of 6 or 7, there is obviously like some difficulty associated with it now compared to, if I were to acquire it at a younger age. So is age not a factor at all? Or
See,
is
this
it, like you said, like
yeah.
accumulative kind of?
It is a more popular conception that children do acquire languages earlier. For example, if parents migrate from, let us say, Andhra Pradesh to Delhi, uh, the proficiency with which a child would acquire and develop Hindi is perhaps better than the parents. That is very common observation. That children acquire languages much earlier, yes. But then one has to also understand that the adults have a limited engagement with other languages and so on, and therefore there will be limitations to how much they can learn. But other than that, there is no conclusive evidence that adults have a lesser proficiency in acquiring languages.
We'll just take the other question in a bit after Dr. Nagpal has talked. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us. So we've been all this while talking about these cognitive benefits.
हमारे साथ जुड़ने जा रही हैं आप सबकी जगह आरजे दीदी आइए शामिल हो। ठीक 3 बजे हॉल 5 थीम पवेलियन भारत लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल।
Since Jitendra Nagpal sir is here, I request Senior Editor Shri Kumar Vikram to kindly felicitate the guest. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So jumping right back into it, we were talking all this while about these cognitive benefits of being and growing in, in a multilingual environment. I thought I would draw on your experience as a psychiatrist for many, many years about the clinical aspect of this. So, do we know of any sort of positive mental health outcomes associated with being multilingual? For example, I want to start there.
Thanks. Wonderful. Thanks to all of you for bearing a little delay. Got stuck up in the craving for the book fair today in the community. So it shows that India is transforming for books and a lot of book-based learning rather than digital learning also coming in. I can see the NEP 2020, I would say a small representative sample over here with so many wonderful languages. Thanks to Kumar Vikramji for leading the whole idea about behavioral processes that make human being of the 21st century. We've been often discussing this fact. There's no doubt that जब हम भाषा की बात करते हैं या मल्टीपल भाषाओं की बात करते हैं, उसका impact, whether you call it the cultural impact, I would say the socio-cultural impact, the heritage impact. To me, a language, when we were students of mental health and psychiatry, I think it has been, the nearest example I can give is a river. भाषा एक नदी है और कल्चर एक समुंदर है और हेरिटेज एक महासागर है. सो अगर रिवर एक सी में बह जाती है और फिर ओशन में बह जाती है, आई थिंक that metaphor of human understanding grows wider and wider with the type of culture and heritage we give to the next generation when we look at the impact of languages. Now, why should a policy tell us this? My question was to myself about 4 years back. I was part of the making of the initial, I would say the stumbling blocks where the clarity happened. We all sat together, many people across the country. NBT has been a major stakeholder in that. What should be an inclusion in the national education policy? Well, it was imperative कि अगर बच्चों का participation, बच्चों का अपने तरफ से interaction, जो अक्सर pedagogy में इतना intensively नहीं देखा जाता था, the child's own participation, the child's own spirit of inquiry, the child's own ability and the capacity to question the answers of a teacher has been brought forward. एक हमारे बहुत बड़े अध्यापक, सबसे बड़े अध्यापक दो हमारे राष्ट्रपति भी रह चुके हैं, डॉक्टर एपीजे अब्दुल कलाम. आई थिंक उनकी किताबें आप सबने पढ़ी हैं, द विंग्स ऑफ फायर, इग्नाइटेड माइंड्स एंड इमेजिंग, सीइंग द इंडिया ऑफ टुमारो. आई थिंक बहुत सुंदर तरीके से सरल भाषा में उन्होंने हमें ये समझाया दैट द बिहेवियरल चेंज प्रोसेस, मेरी अंडरस्टैंडिंग है ये, उनके साथ जुड़ी हुई बातें उनके शब्दों में जब हम अन्य भाषाओं में देखें, आई थिंक वी आर फॉरगेटिंग दैट द लैंग्वेज which is evolutionary, it is a gift to mankind, rather gift to Homo sapiens. If you look at evolutionary, how many animals in the animal kingdom, or the highest evolved animal, the Homo sapien, would be able to have planning, foresight, vision, execution? All of them need multiple languages, multiple phonetics, multiple semantics, multiple syntax, isn't it? अगर हम evolved हैं, अगर हम thinking individuals हैं, thinking culture है, हम उसके साथ जुड़ी हुई बातें हमारे foresight में है, vision है. NEP is a vision for next maybe one full decade, maybe 2 decades now. That is where the foundation years of childhood lies. I missed out on the expressions made by Honorable Sir, but I'm sure I could understand the last part he was telling us. फाउंडेशन ईयर्स को अर्ली चाइल्डहुड कहते हैं. फाउंडेशन ईयर्स को वो पार्ट लाइफ का कहते हैं जहां पे, इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग, 85 to 90% ऑफ द ब्रेन इज मेड. पहले 7-8 साल की उम्र में ह्यूमन ब्रेन का स्ट्रक्चर लार्ज मेजॉरिटी में बन चुका होता है. आप कल्चरली अलग अलग देख लीजिए, अगर अफ्रीका में 1 साल ऊपर नीचे है, चाइना में ऊपर नीचे है, बट एवरेज दुनिया में एक 7-8 साल के बच्चे का 85-90% ब्रेन का न्यूरोनल स्ट्रक्चर बन चुका होता है. सो जो उस वक्त एक स्पॉन्ज, हमारी भाषा में हम कहते हैं कि भाई ब्रेन जब बच्चा पैदा होता है एक जेली की तरह होता है, और जब इन्फेंसी क्रॉस करता है वो क्ले की तरह होता है. 7-8 साल के बाद वो सीमेंट होना शुरू हो जाता है, गीली मिट्टी से सीमेंट हो जाता है. उससे पहले अगर हम फाउंडेशनल ईयर्स में, द नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी टेल्स अस, आर वी डूइंग आवर होमवर्क? वी शुड डू आवर होमवर्क. Multilingualism as a culture in foundational years for the behavioral change process. It has been found not only the cognitive part, I think अभी तक तो सब हमने मान ही लिया होगा, cognition मतलब हमारा सोच विचार की धारा. सोच और विचार की धारा is our cognition. If I interpret in our own भाषा, उसके साथ जुड़ा हुआ क्या है? जज्बा है, the affect, the model of mood. बच्चे के ग्रोथ में सबसे पहले हम उसके मन की बात करें ना. हमारे आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री 100 एपिसोड के बाद भी यही बात कर रहे हैं, मन की बात करें. बच्चे के कॉग्निशन की बात तो आएगी ही, क्योंकि वो ब्रेन अपना डेवलप हो रहा है. वो कॉग्निशन यानी कि सोच विचार की धारा, पढ़ाई लिखत हो, एरिथमेटिक हो, डेली लाइफ की दिनचर्या हो, उठना बैठना, खाना पीना, खेलना कूदना हो, दैट इज गेटिंग सिंथेसाइज्ड इन द कॉग्निशन. But does it carry an element of emotion? Well, it carries only the element of emotion early childhood mein. That is why we are bound to create happy schools, happy bhasha wale, happy schools with happy teachers and happy pedagogy. Therefore, you will have happy citizens and happy children of tomorrow. So we should not forget that while we are looking at cognitive resonance, cognitive echo in the multilingualism as a research which is happening in a big way, we are bound to carry with us the affective and the conative part. इसको मैंने बताया आपको कि emotional component of adding to the cognition or cognitive learning and the behavioral part of adding to the cognitive learning. So please do not forget that. The cognitive part of learning in early childhood is the hallmark of a tree that will grow into ages with branches and fruits that will come much later. So my initial impression would be that we have to also look at the far-reaching benefits of multilingualism, not only in the classroom. मुझे कल ही एक प्रिंसिपल ने, आर्मी पब्लिक स्कूल दिल्ली कैंट की हैं, बड़ी जाने मानी प्रिंसिपल हैं, उन्होंने बताया कि हमारे क्लासरूम में, यहाँ पे कोई है फौजी भाई, आप अंदाजा लगा लीजिए, एक केंद्रीय विद्यालय में या एक आर्मी स्कूल में या सैनिक स्कूल में एक ही क्लास में कितनी भाषाएं होंगी? कम से कम 8 या 9 भाषाएं एक ही क्लास में होंगी, बिकॉज पेरेंट्स के ट्रांसफरेबल जॉब हैं. हमें याद है जब हम 7वीं 8वीं में थे, हमारी क्लास में, मैं बिहार की बात कर रहा हूँ, आप जानते हैं, करीब 10 भाषाएं थी, बिकॉज पीपल फ्रॉम आर्मी बैकग्राउंड, पीपल फ्रॉम बैंक एम्प्लॉयज, पीपल फ्रॉम different jobs which are 2 years, 3 years, 4 years transfers. It was not just about English was connecting, Hindi was connecting, but the charm and the challenge was such wonderful languages of India. And I remember this principal telling me only yesterday that is there a difference? I told her about this program today. And she said, is there not a difference about behavioral stability, language mastery, expression mastery, in children who are exposed to multilingualism? Because उनकी experience pedagogy की बताती है कि ऐसा है, but worth researching. Maybe सर आज के टॉपिक के बाद ये रिसर्च हम सजेस्ट भी कर सकते हैं कि जो बच्चे अपना अध्ययन, अपनी पढ़ाई, अपनी स्कूल की शिक्षा फाउंडेशनल ईयर्स के बाद, खासकर जब एनईपी ने इस बात का सलाम किया है कि मल्टीलिंगुअलिज्म विल बी द हॉलमार्क ऑफ आवर ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट, होलिस्टिकली ऑल राउंडेड पर्सनालिटी डेवलपमेंट। बिकॉज स्कूल में हम केवल पढ़त लिखत के लिए तो नहीं जा रहे हैं ना, हम केवल पढ़त लिखत के लिए नहीं जा रहे हैं। दैट वाज लिटरेसी। उसके बाद एजुकेशन कहा गया, उसके बाद ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट कहा गया है। टुडे वी लुक एट होलिस्टिक ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट, physical, mental, social and spiritual also while I walk into the happy school. So undoubtedly अन्य भाषाओं में बच्चे की विभिन्नता, बच्चे की लर्निंग विभिन्नता, उसकी एकता उस अनेकता में दिखाई देगी नहीं, दिखाई दे रही है। So we are proud to be Indians, to boast about the fact that हमारे schedules में, संविधान के schedule में 22, we have 22 languages, yeah, 22 लैंग्वेजेस हमारे संविधान में लागू हैं। और अभी जो मल्टी लैंग्वेज फॉर्मूला स्कूल एजुकेशन में आ गया है, 2 और 3 एट योर चॉइस, एट योर लेवल ऑफ चॉइस, नॉट ओनली इन ग्रेड 1, ग्रेड 5, ग्रेड 7। आप कभी भी अपने स्कूल के शिक्षकों के साथ, अपने पेडागोजी के साथ, अपने पेरेंट्स के साथ ये फैसले पे पहुंच सकते हैं कि मुझे कौन सी भाषाएं कब तक सीखनी है। What a charming freedom. I would say this freedom of liberty for multilingualism in schools is a hallmark of a stable, successful, well-achieving youth of our country. Those are my initial remarks.
Would you like to
Can I
respond?
just add to what was said earlier that there's a lot of research to show that those individuals and children who grow up with multiple languages have a wider perspective to the world and have a greater tolerance of diversity. It's like each language giving a window to the world, and when you have multiple perspectives, you develop better emotional competence and better competence of tolerating cultural linguistic diversity.
Okay.
साइकोलॉजिकल कॉम्पिटेंस एक शब्द है, साइको सोशल कॉम्पिटेंस। आप सबने जीवन कौशल के बारे में सीखा है, जाना भी है। नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी हैज टेकन अ लीड, हैज टेकन इन अ नेचर।
अगर किसी को कोई मिले तो प्लीज हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन पे रिपोर्ट करें।
Thank you. The National Education Policy, thanks for reminding, sir, has taken a lead in life skills education. वो शिक्षा जो हमारे लिखत पढ़त की शिक्षा के बियॉन्ड, हमारे सिलेबस के बियॉन्ड, हमारे टेक्स्ट बुक्स के बियॉन्ड हमें जीवन कौशल सिखाती है। सेल्फ अवेयरनेस, एम्पैथी, क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग, प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग, इंटरपर्सनल रिलेशनशिप, जो सर ने बताया, वाइडर पर्सपेक्टिव, एक सिनेमास्कोपिक पर्सपेक्टिव ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट का देने की शिक्षा मल्टीलिंगुअलिज्म के बगैर हो ही नहीं सकती है। बट वो जरूरी भी है, ये तो रिसर्च में वर्ल्ड वाइड मान्यता मिल चुकी है। एंड इंडिया इज अ हब फॉर दैट। इंडिया इज अ हब फॉर लर्निंग व्हेन वी कम अक्रॉस एन इंटरैक्टिव डायलॉग इन अ क्लासरूम, प्रोजेक्ट बेस्ड लर्निंग, इंटरैक्शन बेस्ड लर्निंग। तो आई थिंक
सामने एक 4 वर्ष का बालक जिसका नाम अनिरुद्ध है और उसके घर का नाम टिनटिन है, ब्लू टी शर्ट में कहीं अपने पिता से खो गया है। कृपया जिसे भी कहीं भी मिले वो बच्चा हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन पर पहुंचाए। कृपया ध्यान दें, एक 4 वर्ष का छोटा बच्चा जो अपने पिता से बिछड़ गया है, ठीक है, कृपया उसे हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन पर पहुंचाएं। ब्लू टी शर्ट और पैंट में।
आई थिंक वी शुड। मैम ने पूछा था फ्रॉम द क्लिनिकल पर्सपेक्टिव। मैं आपको ये बता दूं, आप सब जानते हैं, पेपर में पढ़ते हैं, रोज आता है, आंकड़े आ रहे हैं। कम से कम आज से 20 साल पहले केवल 5 या 7 या 8% होगा। ऐसा क्यों है? खासकर कोविड के बाद कम से कम 20% से ज्यादा बच्चे हमारे देश के, यानी कि करोड़ों में हैं, जो मानसिक बीमारियों के रोगी होते जा रहे हैं। एंजाइटी, डिप्रेशन, सुसाइड्स, ड्रग्स, वायलेंस, बुलिंग, टीजिंग, रनिंग अवे फ्रॉम स्कूल, रनिंग अवे फ्रॉम होम। ये बातें पहले इतनी अक्सर घरों में या स्कूल में नहीं होती थी, सुनी भी नहीं जाती थी। आप अखबार उठाएं, कोटा में सुसाइड, आईआईटी में सुसाइड, प्रीमियर इंस्टीट्यूशंस में 16 साल, 15 साल। मैं नहीं कह रहा कि इसका लैंग्वेजेस से लिंक है, लेकिन हमारा कम्युनिकेशन कहीं एक दूसरे के साथ तो कम हो रहा है ना. वी आर मिसिंग आउट ऑन ईच अदर. पेरेंट्स वर्सेस चाइल्ड, टीचर वर्सेस चाइल्ड, चाइल्ड वर्सेस चाइल्ड, टीनेजर वर्सेस टीनेजर. कहीं पे संवाद, वो संवाद में तो भाषा है ना, संचार में भाषा है ना. अगर वो भाषा है तो उसके सीखने के तरीके अगर इतने अनेक हैं, तो एकता तो उसमें ये है कि अन्य भाषाओं में अलग इमोशंस हैं, और वो इमोशंस जब इकट्ठे होते हैं, हम सहानुभूति नहीं, हम संवेदना एक दूसरे की बेटर रचते हैं. This is going to add to the minimization of mental health conditions, the clinical conditions which are rising. I come across teenagers every day. I've been discussing with sir. He keeps telling me to make a catalog. Okay, why this is happening? We are not only surprised, we are shocked. We are shocked why a 14-year-old wants to take life. हम हैप्पी स्कूल की बात करते हैं, हैप्पी फैमिली की बात करते हैं. 13 साल का बच्चा तो कूदना चाह रहा है, अपने आप को फना करना चाह रहा है. Somewhere are we losing our youngsters? The answer is yes. No, we will not do that. We will through our language, our words of silence, our sounds of silence, our multiple languages reach out to the heart and soul of our young children. We are the largest populated country in the world. We have the largest youth in the world. We have the largest number of youngsters, young minds in the world. So it is a challenge for us to utilize languages, bhasha, communication, compassion consistently to make a better human being who can deal with life tomorrow. इसको हम जीवन कौशल शिक्षा कहते हैं, जिसको एनईपी में स्वरूप तरीके से बताया भी गया है और लागू भी हो रहा है.
So thank you, sir, for highlighting that issue. I have so many more questions, but we're running out of time. So I'll just take maybe one or two very quick questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am.
सर
sir,
आप सबकी चहेती आरजे गिन्नी. आइए इनके स्वागत में हमारे साथ शामिल हो. ठीक 3 बजे हॉल 5 थीम पवेलियन भारत लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल.
गुड आफ्टरनून सर. मैं शोभित सांकेदर शाहजहांपुर से मैं पीएचडी कर रहा हूँ रीजनल लैंग्वेज में. बट सर मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि आपने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले ही कहा था कि भाषा एक नदी है. लगभग सर 450 से ज़्यादा भाषाएं भारत में बोली जाती हैं. तो ये भाषाएं जो क्षेत्रीय भाषाएं हैं वो सूख क्यों रही हैं, नदियों की तरह सूख क्यों रही हैं? जैसे मैं कन्नौजी लैंग्वेज की बात करूं, फॉर एग्जांपल जॉर्ज ग्रियर्सन ने इंडिया का फर्स्ट लैंग्वेज सर्वे किया था 1889 में, 1888 में एक्चुअली. उसमें लगभग 40 लाख लोग बोल रहे थे कन्नौजी को. बट अभी लगभग 200 सालों में केवल 60 लाख तक इम्प्रूवमेंट हुआ है. 60 लाख प्रेजेंट में है, जबकि अभी लगभग 1.5 से 2 करोड़ होना चाहिए था उसकी संख्या. तो सर ये भाषा मर क्यों रही है? और दूसरा सर हम बात करते हैं 86 की एनईपी में या 2022 के एनईपी में कि रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस में स्टडीज कराई जाएं बच्चों की, बट फिर भी पेरेंट्स उस पर ध्यान नहीं दे रहे हैं. हम पेरेंट्स को कैसे इंस्पायर कर सकते हैं इन सब चीज़ों के लिए? थैंक यू सर.
Actually, much more than 450. It's close to 5,000 languages being spoken in Indian context, Indian subcontinent. Now, why are some languages deprived of their legitimate place? You know, there are so many explanations to it. State policy to the community approach and all that. So I really cannot answer that in a brief space of time. But the question is, you know, the fact of dominance of languages is very unfortunate. I've talked about a hierarchical pattern of language, some languages being more dominant than others, which is unfortunate. We have taken what is called linguistic human right perspective, which says that every language has a right to be developed and every person has a right to develop her own language, to learn in her language and to propagate her language. That unfortunately is not happening because the world is getting more dominated by certain languages, English in particular. Now I have called English a killer language in India because English is actually
ये ध्यान दें,
killing.
एक 4 वर्षीय बच्चा अपने पिताजी से बिछड़ चुका है, जिसने ब्लू टी शर्ट और ग्रे पैंट पहनी हुई है। जिस किसी को ये बच्चा मिलता है, हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन पे पहुंच जाए। अनिरुद्ध, जिनकी उम्र 4 वर्ष है, उनके पिताजी का नाम अभिनव है। जिस किसी को भी ये बच्चा मिलता है, हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन पे पहुंच जाए।
Okay, English is actually, wherever English has spread all over the world, the extent of linguistic diversity has been adversely affected in those areas. And we know that linguistic diversity has to be preserved like cultural and biodiversity. That is a different topic altogether. I'm not going into it. But one has to know this hierarchy and the power relationship that is associated with languages, which is very unfortunate. But then the fact that there are so many languages should not be a deterrent to a country like India to not to offer education in the mother tongues. A country like Papua New Guinea, which is one of the poorest in the world, has education in more than 600 languages. Now, why can we not offer education in 450 or 500 or 600 languages? I do not understand. So that should be the thing. I think let me change back to the theme of this session, and particularly the question that Professor Nagpal was addressing. It is time that all of us realize that first of all, it is never too late to learn a new language. And the more languages you learn, even if you are an adult or you are old, the better it is for you, both from the perspective of mental health as well as from the perspective of your neurological or neuropsychological health. There is conclusive evidence to show that if you learn a new language, you can delay the onset of dementia. I think Professor Nagpal would be much better to explain why it happens. But the onset of Alzheimer's disease, for example, is delayed in the bilingual, multilingual population compared to the monolingual population. So there are compelling reasons as to why each one of us here must go back with a determination that I must learn a new language tomorrow.
थैंक यू वंडरफुली पोर्ट्रेट। पहले तो आपको मुबारकबाद कि आपने ये सवाल उठाया नहीं है, लेकिन आप इसके बारे में कुछ करेंगे। हमें पूरा विश्वास है कि आप 400 हो या 5000 हो, कहीं ना कहीं भाषा का एक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन युग शुरू करने के लिए हम सब तैयार हैं। देखिए, पॉलिसीज और प्रैक्टिसेस जब एक प्लेटफॉर्म देते हैं, पॉलिसीज एंड प्रैक्टिसेस, वो 86 में नहीं था, ठीक है, एक एवोल्यूशन हो रहा है। 86 क्या था आप बताइए? आजादी के कितने साल थे? 40 साल, है ना? अब आप 75 साल कर बैठे हैं। आपको ये आजादी है कि आप किसी भी भाषा में उस भाषा की सभ्यता और संस्कृति को निचोड़कर एक देश के प्लेटफॉर्म में सामने रखें। आप ही बताइए, आप इतने सारे रीजनल फिल्म्स देखते हैं, मुझे शौक है मलयालम फिल्म्स देखने का, तेलुगु फिल्म्स देखने का, और आप ये देख लीजिए मणिपुरी फिल्म्स हैं, असमी हैं, बंगाली फिल्म्स हैं, ठीक है, बॉलीवुड की तो हम देखते ही हैं अक्सर। लेकिन हम क्यों देखते हैं बाकी फिल्में? क्योंकि उस भाषा में उस सभ्यता के कोई विषय उठाकर, कुछ विषय उठाकर जब प्रस्तुत किए गए हैं एंटरटेनमेंट के फॉर्म में, हमें सीखने के लिए बहुत कुछ मिलता है। उस वक्त वो भाषा मैटर नहीं करती ना, उसका सुर, साज और संवाद मैटर करता है। एजुकेशन को वैसे ही क्लासरूम में लाना जरूरी है। इट डजंट मैटर वेदर अ प्रोज और अ पोएट्री इज रिटन इन मलयालम और इन असमी लैंग्वेज। इट मैटर्स के परिवर्तन मेरे अंदर लाने के लिए वो पाठ्यक्रम मेरे को कितना छू जाता है। भाषा की कनेक्टिविटी सबसे पहले है, ठीक है, उसके बाद उसकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग है, उसके बाद जो डेवलपमेंट होगा। 3 युग से हमें गुजरना पड़ेगा ना। आपका जो रिसर्च है यही बता रहा है। पहले कनेक्टिविटी के लिए, जैसे साहब ने बताया कि अंग्रेजी हमारी कनेक्टिविटी की लैंग्वेज बन गई। अगर 22 लैंग्वेजेस हमारे देश के हैं जो शेड्यूल में है ऑलरेडी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में, और भी बन जाएंगी, लेकिन अंग्रेजी हमारी कनेक्टिविटी की भाषा बन गई। अब हम कनेक्टिविटी के लिए और भाषाएं क्यों ना सामने लेके आए जो हमारे दिलो दिमाग से पर्सनैलिटी की शेपअप करें बच्चों के लिए। उसी से ये जाहिर है, जो सर ने बात छू दी, लेकिन क्योंकि टाइम कम है, ब्रेन की स्फूर्ति, ह्यूमन ब्रेन की स्फूर्ति 1.5-2 किलो का जो ब्रेन होता है उसकी स्फूर्ति हम भूल जाते हैं केवल पौष्टिक आहार से नहीं होती है, केवल प्रोटीन और कार्बोहाइड्रेट के कॉम्बिनेशन से नहीं होती है, मिनरल से नहीं होती है, हमारे इमोशनल वेलबींग से होती है, कॉग्निटिव वेलबींग से होती है। और वो भाषाओं में उसका बीज है, उसका बीज भाषाओं में है। आपके आसपास आप देखिए, आप थोड़ा रिसर्च करिएगा इस पे, कितने बच्चे खुशी खुशी स्कूल जा रहे हैं और वो हैप्पीनेस उनका क्यों है स्कूल जाने के लिए? क्योंकि उनके मन की बात की कनेक्टिविटी हो रही है, उनको सेफ्टी, सिक्योरिटी और सपोर्ट मिलता है लर्निंग के लिए। लर्निंग इज नॉट इनफ, आई नीड टू बी हैप्पी इन दैट लर्निंग एनवायरनमेंट, इन दैट हैप्पीनेस आई कैन लर्न अ लॉट ऑफ लैंग्वेजेस। सो उसका प्रिल्यूड है ये। आपकी फीलिंग आपकी भाषा बढ़ाएगी, क्योंकि फीलिंग की भाषा, प्यार की भाषा केवल लैंग्वेज नहीं होती है, नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन भी होता है। अन्य भाषाओं में अगर फिल्में बनती हैं और हम उसको अप्रिशिएट करते हैं, नेशनल अवार्ड मिलता है, दैट इज बिकॉज द फीलिंग इन दैट हैड नो लैंग्वेज, बट इट वाज मेड इन अ लैंग्वेज सो दैट वी कुड ऑल कनेक्ट। हमको एजुकेशन को वहां तक लाना होगा और उसकी शुरुआत हो चुकी है। एनईपी में ये सब बातें आ गई हैं। लेट अस कनेक्ट इन अ डिफरेंट वे नाउ, डाइवर्जेंट वे में। हम एक पेड़ को हम एक स्टेम की नजर से ना देखें, ब्रांचेस और पत्तों की और फल की नजर से देखें ना, तभी वो बच्चा डाइवर्जेंट होगा, वर्ल्ड वाइड थिंकिंग करेगा, क्योंकि उसकी भाषाएं हैं, केवल भाषा नहीं है।
So I would ideally like to keep this conversation going, but we're running out of time. It's time for the next discussion. So thank you to both our speakers for engaging in this conversation.
Yeah, on behalf of National Book Trust India, I would like to thank our esteemed speakers, Dr. Ajit Mohanty, Dr. Jitendra Nagpur, and our moderator, Ms. Naina Raj, for sharing their thoughts on the topic, and our audience right here. Thank you so much.